My New Year's resolution, I need to delegate more.
And I need to be more visible.
And I have to stop fixing everyone's problems.
Today, in our episode of Spiraling Up, we're going to be talking with Dr. Josh Elmore, who is an organizational scientist. And Joe, Mary Blanche, and myself, we're going to bring these New Year's resolutions to Dr. Josh, and we're going to have him in a live coaching session walk through how we can become better leaders and accomplish our goals. In this episode, you're going to be able to think about the way that Dr. Josh is coaching us through these different New Year's resolutions. And you can think about your own resolutions as a marketing leader and say, what are you going to look like a year from now? From listening to this episode, you're going to be able to listen to how Dr. Josh walks us through these New Year's resolutions and think about your own resolutions and kind of build out and map how are you going to accomplish your goals to make you a better leader. Happy New Year's, everyone. It's Spiraling Up with Hinge. Welcome, everyone, to Spiraling Up, the podcast for professional services marketers and leaders. My name is Austin, and as always, I am joined by my colleagues and co-hosts, Mary Blanche Kramer.
Hey, Austin.
And Joe Pope. What's up, Joe?
What's up, buddy? I miss you already.
I know. It wasn't that long ago that the three of us were together in Richmond, filming a couple of these episodes of Spiraling Up together. I do miss you guys. I loved being in person. That was such a fun experience.
It was. And early performance on an episode that we just dropped from that recording session is positive as well. So the viewers agree and they are hanging around duration-wise. So I guess we need to do more live episodes. Are we coming down to Brazil?
I want you to. That would be an excellent idea. I think Mary Blanche, between the two of you guys, has been the more serious person about maybe coming down here. And
I'm trying to go to Brazil. I'm going to learn to surf. We're going to do some potting. We're going to figure it out.
In that order. She's going to learn how to surf.
In that order, yes.
And maybe there might be a podcast.
Well, I have an idea because today's episode is all about our professional New Year's resolutions. Maybe the two of you guys need to make a resolution that the Brazil thing is going to be a real idea this year or, early next year. But
don't tease me with a good time, brother.
I'm here for it.
Well, hey, I don't want to delay too long here because our conversation today with Dr. Josh Elmore is super insightful. I mean, I think what our listeners can expect, he takes us through a live coaching call here. We did this completely and as authentically as possible. He had us from the beginning say, map out what is your New Year's resolution professionally? What is it really? No pretending on the podcast. And then he is going to do a live coaching call with us through this. And so I think our listeners are going to get a lot out of it. And it was a really fun conversation. So guys, without further ado, let's turn to our conversation with Dr. Josh. All right, everyone. Well, we are honored to welcome to the podcast Dr. Josh Elmore. Dr. Josh is an organizational scientist, founder of Court Street Consulting, and the host of the Land and Lead podcast that everyone should go and check out. With a PhD from Columbia, he applies scientific rigor to the human side of business, helping leaders navigate complex transitions and strengthen their teams. Josh advises executives, facilitates team development, and orients organizations through sustainable change, drawing on deep expertise from startups to Fortune 500s. His work ensures that leaders don't just land, but that they lead with clarity and conviction. Josh, welcome to the Spiraling Up podcast.
Thank you for having me. I'm super excited to be here with you all and to get into the conversation today.
Yeah, Josh, we're thrilled to have you. Can you start by just telling us a little bit more about what it means to be an organizational scientist?
Yeah, so my background, I have a PhD in organizational psychology, and I think about organizations kind of from, psychology, anthropology, systems, many different fields of kind of influence. And I like the word scientist because it connotes research-backed, evidence-based work, but also organizational, that's the thing we use all the time. So it's practical. I work with leaders every day. We talk about the challenges that they're facing and working through as it relates to starting new roles, standing up their teams, getting their organizations arranged in a way that's going to help them accelerate towards their kind of next stage. And I do all of that from a foundation of science. And I like to use the word organization scientist because we're not working in the abstract. We're working with principles that have worked for many, many decades, probably since 1919, when Frederick Winslow Taylor did the first kind of time and motion studies in a factory setting. So I pull on, things from the books behind me, that kind of 100 and plus year span of thinking to help my clients think more strategically about the way that they do their organization practice and lead their systems. So, yeah.
Pulling a book from 1919 is a straight up Jeopardy level answer there, Josh.
Well, it's a pretty short book, so anyone can read, and it's great. It's kind of it's nice to know where your thinking comes from.
Sure. Well, it's certainly a field that has a lot of crossover into both personal and professional spaces, right? One thing that really resonated with us, and I know, Josh, you and I have been chatting for years on and off in a variety of ways, but I think one synergy that you have with us at Hinge is that Hinge's founding partner was a clinical psychology PhD as well. And Hinge brings this big mindset towards behavioral research into how buyers make decisions in professional services. And so kind of looking at it from our perspective with buyers, decision-making, things along those lines, and your perspective with how we make change happen or how we are successful as leaders, I think there's a lot of great connections there. I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about some of the research that you've been doing and then how that's translated to a podcast. As I know that that's an initiative that you've really rolled out strongly in the last year or so.
My practice has really evolved over the past couple of years. What's tended to happen is a lot of my clients are at the beginning stages of starting a new role. And I've kind of found myself over the course of these past couple of years advising in those circumstances and looking for resources for my clients to kind of leverage and to guide them in those moments. And I found that the resources are great, but they're somewhat lacking. And what I really thought would be helpful is having a set of peer experiences. What are other presidents or general managers or CEOs doing when they start their new role? And so I started the Land and Lead podcast because it's a storytelling platform for other leaders to hear the circumstances they're in. There's probably 10 or 15 really critical circumstances that play a role in when you're coming into a new high stakes role. Is, what does your team look like? What is the situation in the organization? Is it a turnaround situation? Is it kind of sustaining success? And as you get the lay of the land, how do you navigate those dynamics? I've been talking with folks that are 7 years into role, a year into role, 7 months into role. And so what does it look like at these different stages? What are you doing right now? Are you pursuing change? Given the change that you've pursued, how has it gone? And that's a lot of where my mind's at right now, is gathering those stories, pulling them out, and getting more resources for my clients to chew on and hear from how other folks are doing it.
And Josh, for those reasons, that's why you came to mind when we started brainstorming this episode. So, we're always looking forward when we're planning out the Spiraling Up podcast. And whenever you think about New Year's, oftentimes you think about New Year's resolutions. But, the classic narrative around New Year's resolutions, right, Josh, is that by right around the time when this episode drops, end of January, maybe beginning of February, people start to kind of slack and slide on those resolutions and the motivation that was so fresh and exciting there at the beginning, and they didn't create, something sustainable and practical. So you being the kind of perfect coach for us in kind of today's episode, where the three of us have planned out a resolution that we have, like a leadership forward resolution for us in our roles at Hinge. We've picked things that I think everybody will be able to relate to. But Josh, what we're hoping we could do today in our time is to just kind of bring your coaching to life, like live here on the podcast. And as we share kind of some of our leadership resolutions, how do we make it past, just the first burst of energy and motivation?
We are looking for you to be the one that helps keep us in the gym, Josh, after we've spent all that money on that fancy membership. And it was a real solid 2 to 3 weeks. But boy, now that we actually have to keep doing it, it's very challenging.
Yeah, I'm happy to be helpful and, be a thought partner here.
Brilliant. Well, I think it's ladies first, right? Did we decide Mary Blanche was going to lead us off?
One of my big goals for this year is to try and accelerate my path to be more of a visible expert for Hinge. It's kind of a journey I've been on for, visible expert. So that's a journey I've kind of been on for a little bit now this year. And then on the personal side, I live in Richmond, Virginia, and the Monument 10K is a big event every year. And I've always wanted to run in it. and I can bust out a 5K anytime, but I haven't ever really trained for anything beyond a 10K. And so I've been out of the running game for a little bit, but it's something that I've always found a lot of joy in, and just with busy life isn't something that I've really been able to focus on.
All right. So professional, visible growth, and then also growth in your ability to kind of go the distance.
That's right.
Okay. So where do you want to start?
Why don't we start? Do you want to start with the visible expert side? I think
Sure.
that's high on my mind.
Yeah, visible expert. So how long have you been doing it?
Well, so I would say my journey in doing this started when I became a partner at Hinge a few years ago. And that's right around, and kind of once I had moved into that, I was kind of thinking, what's next for me? So one of the first things I decided, which was another sub goal of mine, was to go back to school to get my MBA. So that started in 2024, and I'll graduate with my MBA this summer. So that piece of the goal is almost done. So my journey really started there. And then from there, it was I'm learning these new things, applying them to the business. How can I be more visible to our audience? And that's around the time that the marketing team, primarily Austin and Joe, were talking about this idea of starting our podcast. So they kind of presented me with, we'd love for you to be part of it. We're going to do a 3 co-host type format. I just kind of jumped in both feet first. I had never really done anything like this, and we've had a whole lot of fun doing it. So that's kind of my first dipping the toe into starting to do more of that speaking. Then towards the end of last year, we decided, the 3 of us, that we were going to start pitching ourselves for more speaking engagements. So we put some effort towards that, and each of us actually have landed some speaking engagements for 2026. Joe and I are going to be speaking at CIRC, the Southeast Regional Conference for SMBS, in March in Norfolk. And so that'll be my first true speaking engagement at a conference.
Well, so it sounds like you've been doing quite a bit, and you have a lot of catalysts to accelerate you through the visible expert, right? So managing partners, so promotion, the MBA, so professional promotion, right, from the learning side, and then also the opportunities, right? So Spiraling Up podcast and speaking engagement. So it sounds like there's already kind of a propellant, right? So you have the professional development pieces and then the opportunity pieces that are going in there. How are you thinking about bridging those and leveraging those kind of 2 core elements?
Well, it's interesting you say that. So the first leveraged the podcast actually to gain that first speaking engagement. So our first speaking engagement that we're doing in March, it actually has a podcast theme to it. So we're actually going to be interviewing a subject matter expert on stage for a 60-minute slot. So it's kind of, as you use like the word bridge, it is kind of like that perfect segue from the podcast essentially in this format to doing a live format. So something that I feel like will come fairly naturally after doing 20 something episodes that we've done so far, and then taking that to the stage. So that's kind of how I'm bridging those 2, and then hoping that's a jumping off point to then start doing my own speaking on different topics.
What would you say is your goal for 2026 as it relates to being a visible expert? Like the core goal, maybe you have a
I'd like to pitch myself for more speaking engagements. So branching outside of the podcast to do that. And then I think also just looking for other opportunities to speak on other podcasts and in different formats, smaller formats that are different partnerships. We host a number of events for our partnerships outside of just attending the conferences. So there's lots of opportunities to, speak at that level too.
I'll pull in Joe and Austin in a second, but just before we do that, what do you hope to achieve with your visible expertise?
The larger goal is to help continue to grow Hinge and be visible in the marketplace and promote our organization.
What's coming up for you, Joe and Austin, right? Because we talked about this idea of we're doing thought partnership on each of your goals, but we're also looping in each other to kind of have a view of context, right, from our colleagues. I know that you're all from different areas inside Hinge. What's your view on what Mary Blunt has shared so far?
We recently had the 2026 high growth study come out, and the number 2 marketing priority in 2026 for high growth organizations is developing thought leaders. 27% of high growth organizations referenced it as something. It fell just behind social media marketing and being effective with that as a top priority. It works, frankly. And then obviously Hinge has made a lot of investment into this as well. We've written 2 books about it. The title of our original podcast that came out a few years back was the Visible Expert Podcast. So we're strong believers in how valuable this could be, especially for folks as they continue to drive their careers forward.
The thought that came to my mind, and Josh, I would love to hear your thoughts about this in terms of your work with leaders that are kind of maybe excelling to like the C-suite for the first time. Like, I remember when we did our visible expert research, and I have now kind of existentially felt it myself. I'm curious what Mary Blanche thinks, but this whole idea of imposter syndrome. It's like when you start to kind of punch up towards more visibility and you start to pitch yourself to be on a stage speaking. I know that a lot of the visible experts that we've spoken to, and again, like I've started kind of thinking about this in terms of like, just can't get around that inner voice sometimes that's like, but there's probably so many other people out there that are smarter than you that could be talking about this as well.
Imposter syndrome is an interesting one. There's not a lot of like research around it. There is, but it's also kind of an amorphous construct where you think about where does it come from and how does it, manifest and in what circumstances. Still kind of in early days in terms of what the research says about it. But there's the validity in people's experiences is not unreal. It exists, right? So this idea of as you ascend, as you get more opportunity, as you get more responsibility, more visibility, to your point, there's this feeling that you are maybe unworthy of it, or that you are not equipped fully to speak on behalf of the expertise that maybe people are assigning you. And the interesting thing about learning, and maybe Blanche, you can speak to this, right? Doing an MBA is the more that you learn, the more that you see you don't know, right? So you start to uncover your ignorance.
Yep.
And so imposter syndrome is really interesting because it kind of speaks to this humility that we get when we learn. Sometimes it can be threatening to our sense of identity or our sense of self. And all these things are kind of mixed up in this idea of imposter syndrome, I would say, because it's complex and it's multifaceted. It comes from different sources. So all that being said, what's your experience of it, Mary Blanche?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's interesting what you just said about, higher education. And even recently, I took a marketing course, and obviously I, own a marketing company. And taking that course, there were several things even in that class where I was just like, oh man, I'm gonna crush this. This is easy. I own a marketing company. But just some of these aha moments that I had, and how that really made me think, and how I can apply that back to the organization. So I think it has definitely given me some of that additional confidence, but also additional curiosity to kind of continue that journey.
Yeah. And I think taking that learning mindset, that openness, and being willing to change your mind is super powerful. It's such a critical leadership trait where, if you think you know the answer, you will be let down when things start to fall apart because you're not leveraging the people around you. The best leaders that I talk to are the ones that aren't necessarily subject matter experts. They are experts in leveraging the experts around them, because that's what it means to manage, right? You're not doing the content of the work, you're coordinating the effort of others. And so it takes a lot of humility to do that work. What would you like to do to ensure, it sounds like you're already getting speaking gigs, you're keeping the visible expertise going. What do you specifically hope that you think is going to fall through the cracks, that you're like, okay, this resolution may break down because of X, that we can address?
We kind of talked in the beginning about, wearing a bunch of different hats, right? I think my concern would be something might fall off because, you're wearing so many hats all the time. But I think intentionality is a word I keep coming back to. And how can I just continue to be intentional throughout the year with this specific goal of mine? And so I think that's going to require, really just like I have to do for my MBA, which is a challenge in itself, when there are only so many hours in the day, like how do you make time for those kind of goals? And, I've had to rework the construct of how day in and day out I'm able to do that. And I look at this no differently as, how can I look at how this week pans out, and how can I be intentional about, making sure I'm dedicating the time to this goal that I've set out to achieve.
Okay. So being intentional, and it sounds like you have that practice down. And what's one next step you'll pursue to ensure that you're kind of keeping on with the resolution?
Yeah, I think so. From when we do that speaking engagement in March, we're going to video it, all those things. And I really want to be able to use that, but to package that to pitch to some other events and conferences. So that's kind of the long range next step. And then I think in the shorter term, we're all starting to, be guests on other podcasts, do guest articles with other organizations. So just continuing to drive that forward.
Great. So snowball effect.
Yeah, that's right.
And then your 10K, right? So
I think
you have this goal of running in the Monument 10K in Virginia, right? And so anything from our previous conversation striking you as applicable to kind of holding on to that goal? And maybe you can share a little bit of what you've tried and what might be getting in the way?
Yeah, I think intentionality still resonates here. I think when I started my MBA, I've always been someone who gets up super early, works out before my kids wake up, and then I'm ready to receive them when they wake up for the day. And I found that one of the things that really had to drop off was a lot of times I was finding that was the only time I had potentially in a day with after school activities and stuff to study in the morning. So it ebbs and flows depending on what the course is, but as where I've always been able to be consistent in that working out piece that kind of fell off. So I think I just have kind of looked at, okay, if I'm going to re-engage myself to be intentional. And I didn't want to make it, I'm going to work out 5 times a week. I'm going to, I wanted to have a more holistic goal of I'm capable of running a 10K. So I felt like that was a better way to frame it in my mind to make it achievable. So it's less about how many times do I get down there at 5 a.m., but more about, how can I create that drive and that endurance to, get myself across the finish line.
It goes back to this idea you were talking about with many-hattedness. You're wearing many hats, right? So I'll share something that I share with everyone I talk to that has a busy life and is trying to achieve many things simultaneously and just kind of keep things on the rails, right? And stay healthy. Is the first thing to take into consideration is that you're obviously successful, right? So you're obviously doing many things well because of your position in life, the things that you've achieved so far. So it's always good to look back and say okay, what have I done? And then also to give yourself a break, to know that there are many things to work on, and also the things that are just required, right? Taking care of your family, working in the organization, right? The core things. And as you give yourself a break and look back and recognize your accomplishments so far, you can use that as your insight into where are those moments that I can integrate. And as you said, right, there's a conflict between studying and running.
Right.
Which is hard. So you can't do everything. And so I think just give yourself grace to know that you can't do everything in those moments. But in that reflection and in thinking about kind of how you're spending your time and allocating it, you might find those opportunities for additions or integrations. What's one next step you could do around that preparedness? When is the 10K?
It's in April. So
Okay,
I've got
soon.
Yeah, so I've got a little bit of time. My soon-to-be sister-in-law, she's a collegiate runner in college, so I've actually enlisted her help to say, hey, can you kind of just give me a plan? Because I don't think trying to just hit the treadmill at 6 miles right off the bat is probably the best solution for someone who has. It's been a minute since I've been intentional about upping my running game. So she's actually making me a plan so I can kind of work my way into it. And then I really see it as rather than every morning, like we were talking about, if I have that plan, then I'll fit it in where I can fit it in.
And I mean, I think that's one of the best things you can do for yourself is find support.
Yeah.
So, all right. Sounds good. Mary Blanche, thanks for sharing. I hope this was helpful. Any
It
thoughts?
was super insightful. I appreciate it. This is good. Feels good to kind of even just say it out loud, because then just can be that more forward focused and continuing on the journey.
Very good. All right. So who's next?
I think I'm next looking at the list here. And I think there's going to be maybe some good crossover here between some of the stuff you touched on with Mary Blanche and one of mine. So Josh, for my professional one, so I currently find myself in kind of an exciting career transition and juncture where I think probably like many of our listeners out there who are marketing managers, senior managers, and maybe going up into that director level position, my resolution is the following. to spend less time doing technical marketing work and to spend more time architecting the systems for our team and for our clients. So this is kind of like that mid-career transition where I'm not just coming on the team to kind of fulfill and do the work that needs to be done, like right in front, but actually transitioning into more of a leadership role where my focus and energy really needs to be on improving, progressing the systems. This year, we're kind of launching like a whole new product in terms of how we're looking at SEO and, bringing in like generative engines and like onboarding some new products for that. Like that takes time and that takes like a lot of dedicated focus. And the transition I'm making right now is one where I really need to build my work routine around delegating more, and so that I can actually carve out room for the time for these important tasks that I'm taking on as more of a leader. And one exciting transition as well is that our team is growing, our marketing team is growing, and I have the opportunity now to actually bring on a team member and even work with some existing team members on some of these roles and duties that I've traditionally been responsible for. I will be honest and say that I have had this resolution for about a year now and I don't think I've been as good at letting things go and delegating work as maybe I could have been. That's my professional one. My personal one is a lot less wordy. It's very simple. Less screen time, especially in the house, like less time on my phone, less time on social media applications, like just more time alive in space, spending time with my family, spending time with my kids, spending time outdoors, less time on the screen.
Very good. And so congrats on, right, getting more responsibility and ascending in the organization. Always a catalyst for change for yourself, but it's also a challenge because if you haven't done it before, then how do you do it? And it sounds like it's been a year. My first question is so you're hiring on some resources for delegating. Do you have that backfill? To what extent can you delegate? This past year, you said it's been hard. Have you had the ability? Have you had the resources allocated to you for effectively delegating?
Yes and no. I think in some projects and circumstances, I've had some availability to work with other internal team members to hand over. Like, for example, we just launched this big high growth study that we're promoting right now. Everybody make sure you go download the high growth study, highgrowthstudy.com/HGS. Get the report. Got to always promote that. And this year I did have someone shadowing me in terms of how we project manage that project to promote the survey, I should say, to project manage through the development of the different research reports. As I've looked back on that era of like having someone shadow me through that project, I don't think I let go of the reins enough in terms of like that transition from like, okay, you're shadowing me to, no, never mind, it's just easier if I still do it. I'm not sure that I clearly made that like let go of the reins and empowered the person to the degree that I could have.
Yeah. And so, right, that learning in and of itself is powerful, right? Because there's no way to know until you do and then see and say, okay, well, I'm going to do it differently. So you got this project, you had a resource to delegate to for that project. You didn't delegate enough. What would you have done differently?
Set clear expectations for myself and for the team I was working with. Like in a more of a definitive sense, say, this is what I'm going to do and not do this year. And this is what I'm handing off for you to do. Whereas I think things were left a little bit more open-ended and a little bit more fuzzy. Those barriers and those lines were a little bit more fuzzy.
So roles and responsibilities kind of being more formal in that way.
Yeah.
And Joe, Mary Blanche, do you have any insight into Austin's recent opportunity to have a resource to him for delegating, how he did that? Did you see anything around that?
Yeah, I mean, both myself and Mary Blanche sitting in the partner seat have been looking for more and more opportunities to help not only Hinge grow, but also Austin as a professional. I mean, as everybody who's listened and followed this podcast for quite some time knows, wow, there are three co-hosts here. Austin a lot of times takes on a lot of the lift in terms of being a voice for this podcast, as well as some of the preparations and things that go for it, making MB and I look better, if you will. So like the hard work and all those pieces have been done. And in the circumstances, like, okay, well, how do we all benefit, right? Because we've talked about the idea of experts being successful. That was a big talking point just a few minutes ago with Mary Blanche. And Austin's clearly an expert in this type of space, and that can benefit the organization itself. So, but I think the big thing, there was a big theme that we talked about already in this episode is time. So Hinge is a small business, right? And we are all working really hard and we're all wearing all these different hats. And so it sometimes can be very challenging, especially when, while a leader at our organization, not necessarily Austin, is not necessarily able to make unilateral types decisions or things along those lines. So he gets stuck behind a me sometimes, not being able to respond fast enough or help drive through these different initiatives. So I can see and hear kind of in between the lines about why, this was something that Austin mentioned a year plus ago. And while we are moving that way, it can probably seem a little bit painstaking at points to bring about the change.
And it's also part of the reason, we are, Austin was talking about expanding our marketing team in general. And so that, that is an investment that we're wanting to make this year to be able to give Austin, the autonomy to be able to take that next step. There's a lot of value that, that he brings to our organization. And so being able to add to our digital marketing team is only going to allow us to expand on those efforts from there.
Being managing partners, Joe, you're a managing partner, it sounds like. Okay, great. I'm still learning about the organization, so helpful. Mary Blanche, you're a managing partner, right?
Yes.
Yeah. And so being kind of leaders in the organization who have experience delegating in Hinge, what advice would you share with Austin about kind of how he could do this differently this year?
I think that there's an old adage that I think a lot of professionals that have been successful, especially in the entrepreneurial type mindset, have listened to, which is to sometimes you need to ask for forgiveness and not permission. Of course, that can be challenging because if you stick your neck out there and you really screw up, then asking for forgiveness doesn't necessarily make things better. And it can cost you large. But also playing it safe all the time never works. Right. Because at that point, then you're completely at the behest of other people to be able to push forward what your initiatives are and things along those lines. But I think Hinge as an organization has a culture of forgiveness when people have their best intentions for the organization and themselves in why being successful, what could be successful.
For me, I would say, and it's a little bit more of a tactical response, but as someone who also has struggled with being able to delegate over my career and kind of figuring out how to overcome that, I really sat with myself to think, okay, let me write out all the things that I do in a given week and how many of these things actually have to be me and how many of these things either could someone else do or could I train someone else to do? Mm-hmm. So when you can kind of look at your role holistically and think, what only I can do versus someone else, I think that's always a worthwhile exercise.
So we got two things, right? So Joe on ownership, right? Taking ownership of things may not go the right way, but I'm gonna pursue this anyways and delegate it down. And Mary Blanche on the idea of accounting for all the things that you're responsible for, but also in doing so, identifying those things that are kind of like, I could push this off my plate. Austin, thoughts?
Oh yeah, I mean, I love both sides of that. I think that exercise you mentioned, Mary Blanche, about accounting for the things that it's like, hey, when this person starts day one, this is immediately the stuff that moves straight to this person. I think that could be client work I'm doing. I think that could be Hinge work that I'm doing. So I think that's kind of my big nugget and takeaway in that way.
And on your personal one, you have this idea of less screen time. And I think, reflecting on the fact that we're going to be doing personal ones, I think a lot of my advice will start with being kind to yourself, as I mentioned with Mary Blanche, right? Because, the thing is work takes a lot of effort, and that's kind of where we're focusing here on the podcast. And in the personal domain, it's also nice to be flexible because that's the place where you can be more flexible, where you have kind of the ability to give yourself a break. At work, you have to perform. You have to kind of help the organization succeed. That's kind of a given. And in life, it doesn't always have to be about performance. It can be about leisure and enjoyment and those things. Yours is in screen time. That's you're seeking more kind of interpersonal enjoyment. Is that right?
Yeah, absolutely. Sometimes, have you ever had that moment where you kind of have that out of body experience where maybe you've been on your phone for a few minutes and you're just like, all right, what am I doing? Let's put the phone down and go do something a little bit like more tasteful or something more enriching than, maybe doom scrolling or whatever. I just have like really settled into this sense right now that I want to try to use that leisure time to like pick up a really good book, that somebody like really spent tons of time crafting and writing and paying attention to every detail and writing a compelling story. Like I really want to get like I want to be putting that kind of enriching, like high quality storytelling and content. Like I want to consume that and less like, AI slop and stuff like that. Basically, it's like where I'm approaching this from. And I think by maybe drawing a firmer line around like, hey, like less screen time, less time on my phone. The idea would be to replace that with like some of those things like physical books or even like I got a new pair of headphones so that I can put my phone down and listen to an audiobook. That way I'm not tempted to like, multitask while I'm listening, with wired headphones. I can step away from the phone. I can go into a different room and like really like dive into something a little bit more enriching. That's kind of where my head's at.
One of the challenging things about, the modern way of working is it's a lot of cognitive work, right? So you're doing a lot of brain work. And so when you're done with the end of the day and your brain's fried because you did cognitive work all day, sometimes you just want to not have your brain be taxed anymore.
That's true.
So it sounds like you have some thoughts, some insights on how you might do it or pursue alternatives. What is getting in the way of doing that?
Actually, I think it's funny because when it came out of my mouth a few minutes ago, I was like, oh, this relates to the personal one as well. I think it comes down to like, can I draw a clear line of like, what's the decision? Like, don't leave it fuzzy. Like for dinner time with my family, I'm leaving my phone in a totally different room. I don't even want to be in the same room as it. And by drawing like kind of that, that highlighter line, like, and saying, this is what I do now during this time, it's really helped me like kind of fulfill like the goal that I want so that I can be present with my family for dinner, not be distracted by, any kind of notifications or emails that come up. And I found that very successful. So I think kind of just like copying and pasting that template of like something that has been successful and applying it is sort of where my head's at.
Very good. Yeah. Well, it sounds like you have a technique and something that's kind of interrelated to the way that you've been doing or the kind of future pursuit, right? No blurry lines.
That's right. Yeah. I think that's actually really, I might write that down somewhere. Just like no blurry lines.
And that helps with delegation too, right? The more you can be clear for the folks that you're kind of giving instruction to, or right.
Exactly.
So Joe's like, do whatever you need to do to get something done. And that's like kind of ultimate delegation, right? Full ownership. And if you know something, you've routinized something and you're delegating that kind of routinized thing, you're also maybe giving people, that's the training piece and the guidance that they need. And then you can start to hand off ownership. So it would be curious to know, Mary Blanche, Joe, like it sounds like you did some good training for Austin when he first came on. And then it got to a point where it's like, you don't need guardrails anymore. Go out and do. Very good. Well, so I think we got Joe, last but not least.
There is going to be some similarity with my resolution. You heard me talk about just jumping in and doing things and asking for forgiveness later. Well, I've made a career on that, and I actually think I do it to a detriment. And the big reason is that I find myself getting involved in too many things and then having to become what you might consider a chief fixer. So I do oversee business development here at Hinge, and that touches a lot of different areas, both on prospect side as well as existing client side. And if I hear something is going sideways, I usually will slide my chair over and say, okay, so what's going on, or things along those lines. And the next thing you know, I'm up at 11 o'clock at night or later, helping to try to rescue this and make it absolutely perfect. And we had an opportunity a few weeks back where an RFP was missed, for example. And everybody in professional services loves RFPs, right? We had it end up in a spam inbox, and we found out about it at the last minute. And without even asking the rest of the team who could potentially support it, I was like, cool, that's my Sunday now. And from 6 o'clock to midnight, I basically cranked out an RFP and we made the short list. So good for us. But still, like, that is not a sustainable approach. And I need to help organizationally wide people develop their own confidence to be able to solve their challenges and navigate them as a team and not rely on Joe. On the personal side, I want to touch more grass in 2026 than I did in 2025, because this seat that I'm sitting in right now that I just referenced, I spent that 6-hour block on a Sunday. I am really sick of this seat. Luckily for me, I have a standing desk now. So at least I'm not sitting all the time, which has definitely helped the old watch cardiovascular tell me that I'm doing better. But I want to be outside. I love outside. I love sports. I love playing sports. I love doing outdoor activities. I don't like hiking. It's kind of boring. But if there's a goal at the end of the hike, like do I end up at a brewery or something, then cool. But I just want to not be behind this desk for 50 to 60 hours in a week. It's just not beneficial to my mental health. So those are two right there. Josh, I'd be surprised if you haven't heard some of this before from other folks that you've provided coaching to.
Thanks for sharing, Joe. It's similar to where Austin is this idea of handing off, right? And being able to, I think the challenge is, you spent Sunday working on an RFP and you made the short list. So you're being reinforced to do this work because it's successful.
Yep.
But it's not sustainable.
No.
I also see it as a version of protecting your people. So if you're in a leadership role, but taking on more responsibility so as to not burn out others, right? It's a Sunday. Who are you going to email and say work on the weekend, right? I mean, that would not be a great leadership practice to do.
Nope.
Because other folks are not going to appreciate having to work on the weekend. So you take it on yourself. And so it sounds like there's mechanisms that are reinforcing the behavior. And so I'd ask, what is it in the organization, the context that is, and historically has led you to kind of show up in this way?
Yeah, so it's a great way of asking that question, Josh. I mean, realistically, this role that I sit in at Hinge, I'm the only person who's ever had it. Prior to my hiring, it was a very much seller doer, which you see across professional services. And Hinge brought me on to be not billable, honestly. Now I do billable work. I run into folks every once in a while, but the majority of what I do is help our organization grow revenue and hopefully profitability alongside that revenue. Prior to that, we didn't really have that kind of construct. And while we marketed ourselves really well because we're a marketing agency and we practice what we preach, which is amazing how many agencies don't do that, by the way. But for us, we certainly do. And being able to then transition that into revenue, though, was something that Hinge needed to work on. And we in a sense, I did that. So now it's how do you use this team and this construct, one, but two, trust myself enough to let it go, I guess, because I don't want to let it go, because I know if I do let it go, it could go south. And then I've got a team of 20 plus folks who rely on this company to be successful, and I don't want to leave them hurting in any form or fashion.
One thing that you said there that is resonating with me is this idea of, in professional services, everyone's billable. And right, so from being billable comes prestige, or comes the core contribution that you can make to the organization. And so not being billable might also, and you can dispute this, but it's a hypothesis, it might also be influencing you to go above and beyond because of the missing link between contribution and real-time revenue generation.
Sure. Yeah, I'm not going to dispute it. I think that in a circumstance where you can't necessarily point to how your efforts are being directly receiving of money, that it adds, at least in professional services, that it adds to the pressure to really prove your worth. At least I think there's a personal feel that I have to constantly, and this goes back long before Hinge, but I'm constantly having to prove myself on an ongoing basis to others. Never was what I would call myself great at anything. I'm the guy who's good at a ton of stuff, but great at none. And that I have a chip on my shoulder, right? So, and I put it there myself, which is probably the sad thing, but.
Yeah, I mean, And so being in that role can be challenging. And so I'll throw to Mary Blanche and Austin, what's your perspective on Joe's contribution?
Joe is the main person that people go to from the BD aspect. That is his expertise. And so, when something does go sideways, they want his input on that about how to, right the ship in a sense. But I also think that to an extent, there are things that are teachable to the larger organization, people that are also in at least a subset of a business development role, at least within growing their own book of business, right? So I think it's more like a training opportunity for our organization to be able to reduce the amount of times that it has to be Joe that they need for the input, or if it is, in fact, that Joe is the only one at the end of the day that can provide that expertise that gets it across the finish line, that it's in the best possible spot that it can be by the time it gets there.
I think, Joe, about some of the initiatives that we've talked about doing, but that we've said, yeah, but we can't right now just because who would do, the XYZ things that I'm already doing? There's just no more Joe time. There's no more Joe that we could get at the moment. So I think there's an opportunity cost, because I think what I heard come out of the conversation so far, which, I think is an excellent leadership quality, right? You have like a nurturing and like a care, for the whole organization and specifically for the people of the organization. I think that's one of your leadership strengths. But there's an opportunity cost to things that we could also be doing that we're not doing because of, how your time can be utilized maybe inefficiently, and you having to jump in and be the chief fixer on everything. So however we can support you, and I think maybe hopefully Josh has the magic bullet here for us.
I need it, Josh.
Joe, what are you hearing?
Yeah, I mean, this has been a topic for years. So if you were talking about, Josh, when you were doing your run up in the intro, you've worked with people that have been in their roles for years or sometimes days, right? And so I've been doing this job here at Hinge 8+ years now at various levels of responsibility. I became owner partner a couple of years ago as part of my professional growth. And the challenges, like what Mary Blanche just said, is true. Like she and I have had this conversation before, and what Austin is saying is also true. Like we have things on the table that I could certainly be working on if I wasn't like heads down in a proposal, and not to make fun of that as a career. I've made a career out of being heads down in proposals, but it may not necessarily be the best use of my time. And certainly it wasn't the best use of my Sunday afternoon, but things sometimes go sideways and sometimes you just got to go above and beyond, right? But limiting that and creating systems to help improve that is definitely key. Those are some of the things I'm hearing just from the three of you and reflecting off of how I've talked about it.
Another thing to keep in mind is that there's different versions of success or proving yourself to others. So you can prove yourself through execution, but you can also prove yourself through leadership, right? And so, being a leader in the organization, talking about this idea of training others, delegating, doing that successfully is also a way to illustrate your skill sets and your wisdom and if that's kind of a driving factor, right? Being able to kind of achieve. Then I'll ask the same question that I asked Austin. To what extent do you have resources to delegate to? Right? It sounds like Mary Blanche is talking about training. Is that available?
I think, and this is where my advice to Austin makes perfect sense, which is, like, for example, this podcast was a huge initiative that we got off the ground because we just pushed it forward, right? Damn the torpedoes, right? We're going full steam ahead here. And we were able to get it off the ground, and now it's one of our primary marketing tactics that we measure and see success for and things along those lines. A little bit of taking my own advice, right? Because these resources can be made available. We just have to figure out how that looks, and then we need to be accountable to it. And that's the big thing, right? Like if you're going to stick your neck out to do something, we all knew that this podcast could be successful, and we have plenty of metrics now after 20+ episodes that prove how we've been successful. That's great, because I need to be able to then turn to the other owners and partners and also just staff at this company and say, this is why we're spending all this time on this effort. I have to be able to prove that same type of concept, though, when I talk about another resource, for example, underneath me, or the time spent training and then the measuring of those different effectiveness pieces. And I think I'm getting a little stuck up on being able to make sure. I'd be letting go of my baby in a sense, which is being this fixer role, and I think there's probably a bit more personal to it versus this podcast where it was like, I know this is going to work, right? I love talking. So does Austin. And we'll make Mary Blanche talk, like she said. So like that, there was a little less emotion, I think, tied when, you push this type of initiative, a podcast forward versus, okay, this is why I'm here at Hinge. And now I'm going to be pulling back a little bit from that. It's a bit scary in a sense.
I hear this idea in there around not having it's not about not having resources, but it's about your identity in the organization. And I guess the question would be is if you could think beyond where you're at right now and a year from now, and you did hold on to this kind of getting rid of the chief fixer, what would your role look like a year from now?
Yeah, I mean, we're hiring and building out Austin's team. I mean, we could certainly be talking about hiring and building out the larger business development and resourcing structure. The reality is, like Mary Blanche, there's a role in creating visibility and expertise of myself in the form of speaking and writing and contributing at that level as well. And then there is the holy grail of all things agency, which is to be able to gain revenues from referral partners and networks and systems where you're not having to spend significant dollar for dollar or effort in growth. So like I shouted out our organization, we've been hyper successful in creating a marketing system that brings visibility to our organization. And that's great. But we have to mine all that ourselves. We have to convert all of that ourselves. We have to convince all these folks that we are the experts we are, and then sell them and move them forward. There's a whole lot of effort that goes into that. And being able to diversify how we are gaining revenues in the forms of partnerships and referral sources and things along those lines is an area that I think our organization could grow, especially with how impactful these softwares and technologies are in the marketing ecosystem.
And so earlier I heard this idea of not necessarily having a justification for allocating resources to the things that you're doing, and in the sense that you'd have to show the rationale for why you would need those. You just laid out a different rationale.
Yeah.
Right? So given kind of what we talked about, being mindful of time, what's one next step you can take as it relates to this resolution?
I think it's leaning on my team, probably honestly the two people on this call. I just called this a call. That's so funny. But I would say awesome. leaning on Mary Blanche and Austin, who, as we've talked about many times on this podcast, play a role within our organization itself that divide up the marketing and operational side of this, which together with the business development, really, that's the holy trifecta of how the agency itself runs, to leaning on them to help me overcome that fear piece. Because I think that's really what it is. I can speak the rationale behind it. I know why it makes sense. I can even plot out what it would look like, but I still got to jump out of the airplane with the parachute, right? And having accountability buddies, I think is really probably that first step I could do, is making sure that I'm being held accountable.
Thoughts from your colleagues?
If I were to think forward to a year from now and see you kind of operating in a more successful way, I think it would be in like more coaching, like more internal coaching. And I think that like if I think about what would I want to hold Joe accountable to based off this conversation, it would be in that direction. Like, Joe, how have the like coaching calls been with like some of our team members in terms of like helping people independently take on a little bit more? Mary Blanche?
I think, piggyback on that, because I think Joe does an excellent job at coaching. I think that's a really good call out. I would challenge him, I think, to coaching where there doesn't become like a dependency or a reliability on Joe. So coaching with an eye towards, the birds out of the nest and flying.
And Joe, finally, right, you have your personal one. It's interrelated, touching grass. It sounds like it's part of the idea of, not doing an RFP on a Sunday. Do you hear anything from kind of your maybe forward-looking professional role that might help you achieve your personal?
Yeah, it's absolutely creating the time, right? When I have time, I've never had a challenge in getting myself outside. We're busy professionals, all with families and obligations and things along those lines. And in order to free up that time, we've got to hold fast on some of these personal resolutions and still be able to point to how they are being how we're being successful in that manner. I think probably scheduling in some of this outdoor time, if you will, a bit more than I have is a great first step. If you know you've got something coming up, you need to make sure that you're doing the things in order to make sure you get to it. Like, so Mary Blanche is running Monument 10K and in April, like that's a date, right? Like that you have to be able to hit that date. But, scheduling, I like playing golf, for example, or I like brewing beer. I like doing all these types of things that get me outdoors, and, just putting them on the schedule is probably something to help.
We can go back to Mary Blanche's word too, as well, to intentionality. Right. So it sounds like there's a lot of intentionality for the year ahead. And I hope this was helpful in you thinking about the ways in which you would be intentional.
Josh, before we let you go, I want to give you the chance to let people know how they can find you, where can they learn more about what you do. But any last words for kind of the listeners out there who may be going into this new year, they're thinking forward to their professional goals, their ambitions for their organizations, and how they want to be good leaders. I don't know, what word of advice might you leave for our listeners? And then how can people get in touch with you?
Well, thanks for having me. This has been great. I hope I was helpful. And for anybody listening that's thinking about what they're trying to achieve in the year ahead, I think looking back at the way that we just kind of thought around the drivers and the roadblocks that might inhibit our ability to do something, or the things that can accelerate our ability to do something, where are there synergies, right? We just pointed to the ways in which personal and professional resolutions can interrelate and reinforce one another or be challenging. And so I'd say take that systems perspective, look at the full picture, and don't discount that you're probably already doing a lot for yourself. And so given the fact that there's only so much you can do, prioritize the things that truly matter to you, and check in. Once you do that, kind of keep checking in with yourself and find somebody to talk to about it as well, right? I don't necessarily do too much kind of career coaching, but I do advisory where it's more subject matter expertise, along with executive coaching with leaders who are starting new roles, who are coming into high stakes, profit and loss positions, running business units, heading up full organization systems, that want to think deeply with their team, with an outsider who can give them perspective, ask them questions to get them thinking around the contextual factors. So if you're starting a new role in an organization and you need that thought partner, happy to chat. You can reach me at my website is courtstreetconsulting.net. I'm also on LinkedIn, Dr. Josh Elmore, and you can listen to the Land and Lead podcast on all the regular outlets that you would find them. So,
yeah, absolutely. I highly recommend our listeners go and find Josh on LinkedIn. He's got a huge following there, and he publishes a great newsletter, shares clips from his podcast. If you're interested in all things leadership and what some of the highest performing leaders out there are doing in their positions, definitely go out and check out Josh's stuff. Well, Dr. Josh, thank you so much. This was what an episode.
Thanks, Josh.
I don't know what we all expected going into this, but I'm walking away from it with a lot of gratitude. And I hope our listeners found it insightful and engaging. And you learned more about Joe, Mary Blanche, myself, but hopefully you're also walking away with something and some clarity for the new year for yourself as well. Thanks for everyone for watching, listening. Make sure you like and subscribe. If you're watching on YouTube, leave us a review. And of course, if you have any questions about the podcast, suggestions, feedback, you can always get in touch with us at podcast@hingemarketing.com. Thank you, everyone. This wraps up another great episode of Spiraling Up. We'll see you on the next one.